Hello, everyone. It's great to see you and great to be with you all this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. I am Stacy Stewart. I'm Presidency of March of Dimes, and as usual, I'm so excited to have this opportunity for us to have another installment of our Healthy Mom, Strong Baby series. We've been doing this. We really started, early on in the pandemic as we really were trying to reach so many pregnant women, so many families, so many new moms, just getting information on everything related to pregnancy, everything related to the pandemic. And then it evolved into much more than just that. And it's become just a regular way that we can engage and get information out to all of you all. So we're glad to have you here. This October is really a special month. It's National Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month. And all month we've been recognizing and really supporting a lot of the families that have unfortunately had to deal with pregnancy and infant loss. Even though that's an issue that families deal with every single day of their lives, we've had an opportunity this month to just sort of come together and acknowledge, all of the issues that so many women and dads and partners and families are dealing with during this difficult time. And I think for a lot of folks, it may be they may not be fully aware of just how prevalent these issues are of pregnancy loss and infant loss. It is really important that we talk about it. So just some statistics, just so you can get a sense of, how big of an issue this is in this country. Out of 100 women who are aware of their pregnancy, about 10 to 15% of those pregnancies end in miscarriage. Stillbirth or loss after 20 weeks of pregnancy affects about 1 out of every 160 births. And in addition to all of that, more than 21,000 infants born in the US die before their first birthday. And so these are very painful issues that, we all have to confront. But unfortunately, it's a reality for really tens of thousands of families across the United States and even more around the world who are devastated by the loss of a baby. We know this can be hard to talk about. We know that it can be, there certainly are a lot of emotions for everyone around these issues. And even though it's hard to talk about, we hope that this will kind of bring a sense of relief and support so that many moms and dads and partners and families don't feel like you're alone. I think there's probably nothing that can be worse than losing a child than feeling like you're all alone in that journey. And I think what you'll hear from so many of the folks that are joining us today is that they've gotten strength from being around others who have shared similar experiences. They are sharing their own experiences and thereby providing a lot of support to so many people and hopefully to many of you all that need it today. So I'm excited to be on with them today. And just a couple of things before we jump into it. I want to just mention that at the March Dimes, we try to do as much as we can and hope to do even more to provide more support to more families who need the support of a network, who want the experience of remembering the baby that they may have lost. If you are interested in sharing your story of finding support with a network that can help you through challenging and difficult times, please go to our website at marchofdimes.org/remembrance. You can share your story there. You can connect in with a supportive group of families, and you'll be able to honor your baby and other moms who have had babies that are gone too soon. We also provide a lot of information and a lot of support to anyone who's affected by pregnancy or infancy loss. That's also at our website. So at any time you need support, you feel like you need to tap in with some resources, we are going to be sharing more of those resources beyond just what the March Dimes makes available. And you're going to be hearing from some of those organizations and individuals today. But please make sure you put in the chat box on Facebook what your questions are as we're going through the session today, what support you need, what help you need, what you want us to know about what you're experiencing. That will be really, really helpful. So, and as we are going through the chat, we'll be able to see what you're raising questions, and the group on today will be able to address them. So let me just start with a wonderful panel of friends and experts who are going to share their stories a little bit and shine some light on the topic as well. I'll just start by introducing our very own Dr. Shakiba Henderson, who is our Senior Vice President of Maternal and Child Health. She's also our interim Chief Medical and Health Officer at March Dimes. She's a board certified OBGYN. She received her medical degree from Harvard, completed her internship and residency at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Mass General Hospital in Boston. She previously worked, before coming to March Dimes, she worked for CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, where she led the establishment of the National Network of Perinatal Quality Collaborative. She's an amazing leader and is going to be able to provide a lot of insight around the improvement of perinatal quality and what we're doing here at the March Dimes to make that happen. So Dr. Henderson, thanks for joining. We also have a really great friend. I'm so glad to see her. I have the joy of living in Washington, D.C. And the only person, maybe I may offend somebody, the only person I trust with listening to the weather is Lauren Ricketts and her colleagues at BC4. They're amazing. Not only do they make the weather like I can believe it, but they make it fun, and she makes it super fun. And Lauren is currently a broadcast meteorologist, on-air personality with Storm Team 4 at NBC4 here in Washington, D.C. She also, I listen to her on the radio too, because she's on WTOP, which is 103.5 in Washington, D.C. Lauren is the most bubbly, amazingly fun and warm person that you could imagine. But she also has an incredible story of having experienced her own losses through stillbirth and miscarriage and failed fertility treatments. And she has had to do all this in an extraordinary public eye. And she shared a lot of this very publicly, but she's going to share more about her story today. But she certainly understands the grief and the sadness that many families face going through so many difficult challenges with pregnancy. So Lauren, thanks for joining. Tom Truxillo is a facilitator for Pockets of Light, stillbirth and early infant loss and pregnancy after loss support groups. He and his wife endured years of infertility treatment before conceiving their first child. Tragically, their daughter, Haley, was stillborn a month before her due date. And they have also experienced a subsequent miscarriage. But through the participation with Kindermorn, a support group for grieving parents, Tom and his wife were able to provide a lot of support that they needed during that difficult time. They used to live here in the Washington area, now live in Montclair, New Jersey. And Tom, his wife, and along with others have co-founded Pockets of Light to offer consistent support to couples who've experienced pregnancy or early infant loss. So Tom, we're so grateful that you're with us today. Thank you. And then last, but certainly not least, my good friend, Erica Mcafee, who is the founder and CEO of Sisters in Loss, maternal and child health company that helps Black women replace silence with storytelling around pregnancy and infant loss and infertility. Sisters in Loss provides pregnancy, birth, postpartum, bereavement doula, and grief services to help women step beyond anxiety and fear and put trust and peace into the process of healing after loss. So I've also had the pleasure of being on her Sisters in Loss podcast, which she does every single week. So I really encourage everyone to go to that podcast. It's amazing. She's also been featured in every single publication you can imagine, from Forbes to Black Enterprise to Women's Health to the Today Show. So Erica, we're so grateful that you're joining us today, and good to see you again. I'm going to simply moderate the conversation. Again, use the chat and Facebook, but we're going to go ahead and start the conversation. First, I'll turn to you, Dr. Henderson, as our medical expert here, as an OBGYN. Just frame for us and give context to what is really pregnancy loss. There are so many different aspects of it, but how does the medical community define it, and how should we be thinking about it? And if you can explain a little bit about why you think it is that in the United States we have so many of these issues, when we're in the wealthiest country in the world, and we should have all the resources in the world to minimize these issues as much as but unfortunately we see it far too often. So just give us some context for the issues we're talking about today.
Thank you so much, Stacy. So one of the things I think is important to understand is that pregnancy loss is a huge umbrella that captures different conditions that lead to the loss of a pregnancy that is it's multifactorial, and we often look at pregnancy loss as a big umbrella, but they're actually different conditions. When we talk about pregnancy loss, you may hear different terms. You may hear the term miscarriage. You may have heard the term spontaneous abortion. You may hear the term stillbirth, fetal death. And all of these things really are quite different. So we like to categorize and look at pregnancy loss across that spectrum to really understand more about the causes and potential ways to prevent pregnancy loss. The most common type of pregnancy loss is what we commonly call a miscarriage, and it usually happens early in pregnancy. About 80% of pregnancy loss happens during the first trimester of pregnancy. And when we look at causes and risk factors, the number one risk factor for having a pregnancy loss, especially during the first early pregnancy loss, is age, maternal age. And that is because the large majority of those pregnancy losses are due to chromosomal abnormalities or genetic abnormalities. And when you start to look at other potential causes, when you look at the risk factors, with age, the risk increases significantly. That percentage you quoted earlier, about 10 to 15% of pregnancies that end in pregnancies that have been diagnosed, that is, that are clinically apparent, happen and are the number one cause is usually age is the highest risk factor due to chromosomal abnormalities. But when you start to look later in pregnancy, there are other contributors to pregnancy loss, including mom's health, different exposures, conditions, stress. There are so many things that can contribute to loss during pregnancy. And then you have this whole category that we're also including during this month of, during this time of remembrance, including loss of a newborn. And that's a whole nother category of loss. But one thing that I think was really important as a care provider and recognizing that all of those different types of loss is a loss. Sometimes people think, oh, it was just an early pregnancy, just at the beginning of your pregnancy is not a real loss, but we have to recognize that our patients are experiencing loss, whether it happened in the first trimester or if they lost their baby later in pregnancy or even after the baby was born.
Yeah, I think that's what's so tough. And then I think also, for a lot of women and a lot of partners, sometimes we assign a lot of blame to ourselves for it must have been something that we did. Sometimes society assigns that blame to us too, when it's not our fault. I mean, what we're doing at the March Dimes is trying to really do a lot of research and a lot of work to better understand what are some of the underlying causes from premature birth, which can lead to infant loss once the baby is born, to miscarriage and stillbirth. And we still don't know all of these issues. We're still studying a lot of what we can do to prevent these things. But it certainly is always a sad feeling when a lot of women, especially and partners and dads, feel like it's something that they've done, when we have to say, no, these are things that happen, and there could be multiple reasons why they happen. So we can talk more about that, because I think that's an important issue to this whole idea of dealing with grief and loss. But I want to turn it to Lauren. Lauren, thank you again for joining us. And again, you've been quite open with NBC viewers about your own journey, what you've experienced about the loss of your pregnancy last year. You're pregnant now,
Yes.
and we're so excited for you. But can you, if you don't mind, would you just walk us through a little bit of your journey for those that haven't had a chance to understand it, and what you and your partner have experienced?
Yeah. So it was obviously rough, that's to say the least. So February of 2020, it was February 17th of 2020. I woke up one morning, it was 3 a.m. My alarm goes off at 3:30 because I do the morning show for NBC here in Washington. And I woke up and I felt like I felt like a pee. And I was like, that doesn't look right and feel right. And my water was breaking, and I was at 20 weeks. And I didn't know like what was happening. I remember I got in the bath because I was like, okay, I guess I got to figure out what's going on and get my head wrapped around this. So I called one of my anchors, and he's like a brother to me. And I called him, he's got 3 kids. And I said, my husband was deployed at the time. He was in Afghanistan. And I said, Adam, I think my water's breaking. He said, you need to go to the hospital right now. And I said, oh, maybe I can come to work. He said, no, you need to go to the hospital. And so I hurried to the hospital. I didn't even grab anything. I didn't know what was really happening, but as I was driving to the hospital by myself, I could feel water coming out. And so I get to the emergency room, and, sure enough, my water was breaking. And so I spent about a week in the hospital. All the fluid had pretty much left the body at that point. And they said, listen, if you can make it, I think it was like, and Dr. Henderson may add to this because I can't even remember because it was such a blur, but they were like, if you can make it to 23 or 24 weeks, we can give a shot for the lungs, and you might be all right, So it was kind of like holding on at that point, just to keep the baby alive. And so again, I didn't have any amniotic fluid. My husband got back within 2 days. I remember there was some doctors that wanted to terminate. I didn't at that point because I still had a heartbeat. And there was no reason why my water broke. There was no infection or anything like that. So I kept the baby alive until February 23rd. And then they came in with the heart monitor. And then it was just one day, there was no heartbeat. So that next night, so they put me into labor, and I spent 12 hours in labor. And then I delivered the baby on February 24th, about 1 a.m. in the morning. And it was tough because I had just announced in January that I was pregnant. And I waited a little bit. I waited until I was about 14, 15 weeks to announce. And then, this happened. And then we go into a pandemic right after that. So it was just an incredible timing with all of that had happened. And yeah, I was really public with the viewers, but not for a while. I remember I had to make a Facebook video because people kept asking where I was. And I think people already thought the worst. But the last thing I wanted people to do was ask me how my baby was doing, So in May of that year, I made, May 17th, I remember the date, I made a video saying that I lost my baby and that I was coming back at the end of May. So it was tough, obviously. And, but yeah, so that's what happened. It was called pre-prom, which was pre-rupture of membranes, and there was no explanation for it. And it happens, unfortunately. And, it happens to a lot of women, but, and I was one of those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so tough. But your husband was able to make it back.
Yeah.
From Afghanistan, which is amazing.
Yeah. It was
because
crazy.
I can't imagine what you would have done had he not been able to be there, right?
Yeah. And I had 2 people in the hospital with me that I actually work with, that were in the hospital that met me there at 5 a.m. in the morning. And they sat with me through the whole thing. But he made it back it was about 48 hours. He was able to get back. And I remember I was in the emergency room, and the emergency room doctor at the hospital I was he was in the Navy. And I said, he was pre-Navy, a Navy corpsman, before he was an emergency room doctor. And I'd asked him, I said, my husband's gone right now. And I was FaceTiming my husband. And I said, does he need to come back? And I remember he said, yes. And so my husband, was able to get out and fly around the world, to be by my side by the time 48 hours came.
He's an amazing guy. Well, thank you to the U.S. military for
absolutely
that was the most important place for him to be.
100%. I was so glad. I don't know what I would have done.
I don't know. That would have been tough. Well, we're going to come back to this more in a little bit. I just want to bring Tom into the conversation because I think Tom sorry, we didn't want to make you the token male. I guess we ended up doing that because the voice of the dads and the partners are as important in this conversation, and we never want to leave you out and leave your voice out. But talk to us a little bit about kind of what you and your wife Erin went through, and how you were managing through the grief that you both were experiencing, you in your own way and she in her own way. But talk about that a little bit, and kind of what support you figured out you needed along the way.
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me. And I do appreciate being token male. That's okay.
It's not a bad place to be.
No, it's not. Exactly. So my story goes back quite a ways before Lauren started. So my daughter, Haley, as you mentioned, passed from stillbirth, and that was 13 years ago now. And so I've been carrying this with me for a while. So my wife, Erin, and I struggled to get pregnant. We were married for several years before we even tried to get pregnant. And then we tried to get pregnant and struggled through that for several years. And we were, fortunate enough to finally get pregnant through IVF. And honestly, we were on top of the world. We were very happy to move, beyond what we thought was going to be the biggest struggle of our life, that infertility that lasted so long and was such a big hill to get to the top of. And we were just so ecstatic to move on to the next part of our life and looking forward to bringing our baby girl home. Our pregnancy was very much uneventful from a medical perspective. Haley, all of her scans came back normal. She developed perfectly normal. And Erin had her baby shower. We decorated this most adorable nursery you've ever seen in your life. And we were kind of nesting and getting ready to bring our daughter home and preparing to host family for Thanksgiving. And at 36 weeks, Erin's water broke and we noticed a significant amount of blood. And we went to the hospital after the nurses failed to register a heartbeat. A doctor came in and found a faint heartbeat and made the decision to rush Erin into an emergency C-section in order to try to save Haley. Unfortunately, she could not be saved. She died from a rare condition called Vasa Previa, which when diagnosed is almost always preventable through a C-section, but when undiagnosed is almost always fatal. And so, obviously, I don't even know how to say what you feel when your baby dies in that sudden situation. We went from one day being the happiest people on the planet to the next day just being absolutely crushed and devastated and lost. Like, we had no idea who we were. Before this, we were expecting parents, and now what are we other than broken? I think the difference between men and women, though, and the reason I'm on this call, right, is to point that out. And I think the world knew who we were, though. The world knew that Erin was a medical patient with medical needs, and they knew that she was a mom with empty arms and that she needed emotional support. And they knew that I was her husband. And that was it, right? While she was getting the medical and emotional care that she needed, I was responsible for deciding whether or not my daughter had an autopsy. I was responsible for deciding whether or not, she was buried or she was cremated. I was responsible for preparing our home to bring my wife back. And, at the time, I didn't even notice the difference. Honestly, I think I might have even embraced it, right? Because it gave me something to do. The things kept me from realizing really how upside down my world just got turned. And it wasn't until later, right, after the hospital, after the return home, when I realized really just how much I needed too. It wasn't just Erin, right? Pregnancy is a woman's health issue. Miscarriage, stillbirth, those are women's health issues. But after your child has died, the loss of a child that's a mental health issue, and it applies to moms and dads. And so once we got home, I think it really set on both of us that, we really needed some help. We were fortunate enough to get referred when we were in the hospital to a group. We were living in Charlotte at the time called Kindermorn that provided group therapy for bereaved parents. And I absolutely insisted we go because I didn't have any other answers. I didn't know what else to do. I said, might as well try it. We need to do this. And I swear, other than like convincing Erin to marry me, convincing her to go to that group therapy is the best decision that I've ever made in my life. It's like the best thing that happened to us. Going to group, like, it first of all gave me the strength to not only be a supportive husband, but to be a grieving father as well. And to know that it was okay to do both of those things, and that it was okay to expect Erin to support me as well as a wife, and the others in my life, right? To accept support when people offered it. It was okay to hurt. I didn't just have to be a supportive husband. And Without group, I'm not sure I would have gotten there, because the other people in the group were the ones that told me that. Everyone else on the outside just expects you to be the strong husband. They ask, how is your wife doing? How is she doing? They don't ask how you're doing or how you guys are doing. And so without group, I'm not sure, where I'd be individually. And I certainly don't know where we would be as a couple. We absolutely both needed to grieve, and we absolutely did it in different ways. And group is what taught us that, like, we were in group with other members, other bereaved parents, right? Other members of this special group. Not a single one of us handled it the same way. Not a single one of us grieved the same way. And I think if you're in a couple and you're trying to do it by yourself and you're not on the same page, that can cause conflict. But what group showed us was that it was okay to do it completely differently. As long as you're touching base with each other, as long as you're letting each other know how you're dealing with it, you can get through it and get through it together and come up stronger on the other side. So I think, I think it's important to not acknowledge that, and the conversation that you guys are having today, the work that March of Dimes does, Lauren sharing your loss so publicly and in the way you've done it. And Erica, the line from your organization, replace silence with storytelling, I think is so very important, because we all try to do this in isolation because we're scared of like opening ourselves up and the trauma that can come with what other people will think or say. And the more we talk about it, together, the easier it becomes. And the more, like, I don't know how to say it, like, everyone does it differently, but that removes the isolation. Even though no one's doing it but like you're doing it, knowing that everyone else is doing it helps.
Helps a lot. Yeah. And we did something at March of Dimes called Unspoken Stories. We continue it actually, because we felt the same way that, some people are not ready to tell their stories, and that's completely understandable. We don't want to force anyone to tell a story that they're not ready to tell. But often, if you are willing to tell your story, what we have found is that you do get so much support time, like you're talking about, and it provides so much strength to so many others, right? Because so many people are living in isolation. So, Erica, let me just bring you in on that point, because talk to us a little bit about sisters in loss, and why do you think it's important to have a focus on women of color around these issues? Obviously, stillbirth, miscarriage, premature birth. I mean, these things affect women of all walks of life. But why do you think it's important to have a focus in what you're doing to focus on women of color in particular?
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you all for sharing your stories so passionately.
And share your story. And sorry, Erica, share your story too, because you have a story that comes from this as well. Yeah,
I do. So I had very similar experiences to Lauren and Tom. I experienced a stillbirth at 39 weeks and a second trimester loss at 18 weeks. And then went on to have my son, my rainbow baby, with a lot of trauma. I experienced a placenta abruption, so I had severe hemorrhaging. I was in the ICU for a period of time, and ended up having to get a hysterectomy, really to save my life because of all the hemorrhaging I had. So I've experienced the spectrum of losses. And it's so important for Black women, women of color particularly, to share their stories or to be advocates for themselves in this space, because of just the historic and systemic racism that has happened in healthcare and us not being listened to and heard. I don't think I would be here today if my doctor, my OBGYN, didn't listen to me when I went in and said I didn't feel my son's movement. If she didn't listen to me, she wouldn't have immediately wrote me back to the emergency room and did a crash C-section to get my son out and to resuscitate him and to work on me to ensure that, I'm still here, that I got a second chance at life. So it's so important for us on the infant health, the infant mortality side, no different than on maternal health and maternal mortality side, to share our stories, but also to really advocate for ourselves in these spaces. So Sisters in Loss started out as a podcast, as you mentioned, Stacy, of just me trying to find my voice in the space, trying to find other women of color, other Black women who've gone through similar experiences and really share their stories and their journeys to motherhood, but which has turned into just a community of people outpouring and using their stories to connect and to really be in community and sisterhood with one another. And really has turned into a place where people can advocate and ask those hard questions on, who are those providers that they can go to? Should they switch providers based on, certain diagnoses they have, and just have that sisterhood and family and that place of being vulnerable and transparent so that we don't have to be silenced anymore when it comes to our stories and our losses and the struggles that we may have to just conceive and grow our families.
Yeah. Well, I want to, obviously come back around. I just want to, before we get too deep into more of the conversation on support and what's really needed, we've already gotten quite a few questions, and a lot of them very medically directed. So, and so we'll come back to support needs and things like that. But I just want to go back to Dr. Henderson for a minute, because some of you all mentioned some medical terms and some people really wanted to understand these things. So Dr. Henderson, can you explain a little bit more about placenta accreta? There's a question about PPROM. There's a question around other placenta issues that were raised as well. And so if you could just kind of touch on some of those terms that were raised and explain them very briefly before we move on.
Yes, I surely can. And I realized too, as those questions came, I didn't want to take too much time at the beginning explaining all the potential causes of a pregnancy loss, but there are a long list of causes of loss later in the pregnancy, and second and third trimester even. And it seems as if most of our panel has experienced some of those. So we heard about PPROM from Lauren, and PPROM is premature preterm rupture of membrane. So that's basically when the bag of water around the baby that's holding the baby in is ruptured too soon. And sometimes that happens in a setting of preterm labor, or when the cervix, we say cervical insufficiency, or when the cervix is shortened and open, and the baby really is being pretty much literally expelled too soon and born too soon. And then there are other conditions that were mentioned. Vasa Previa is what Tom mentioned that happened with his baby. And that's a completely different condition that usually presents as bleeding. And that's when blood vessels to the baby cross the opening of the uterus. So the passageway where the baby is usually born, there are the blood vessels that are supplying blood and oxygen to the baby cross that way. And when the baby starts to be born that way, or if there's any interruption of those blood vessels, it puts the baby at risk of hemorrhaging and bleeding to death. It's a very severe condition. And then there was the discussion of a placental abruption with Erica's experience, another relatively common complication in pregnancy, where the placenta, which provides all the nutrients and blood from mom to baby, starts to separate from the wall of the uterus, and also causes bleeding that can impact mom and the baby, if you can imagine. So that puts mom and baby at risk. And then there are other conditions that were mentioned, placenta accreta. There's a whole spectrum of placenta accretas when the placenta is implanted a little bit too deeply in the uterus. So the placenta implants on the lining of the inside wall of the uterus, but when that implantation in the blood vessels and tissue of the placenta grow deeper, for example, into the muscle or wall of the uterus, or even in the most severe form, percreta, where it grows completely through the wall of the uterus, it puts mom at extreme risk of hemorrhage or bleeding after delivery, because that placenta cannot be removed readily like it does when it's implanted normally. But these are just some examples of some of the many different conditions that happen during pregnancy that puts baby at risk of being lost. And there are lots of ways for some of these conditions to be prevented and to be recognized early, but sometimes they're not, and can result in a loss.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And if there are more questions on all of that, please continue to put them in the chat, and we'll try to address them. There was another question. This gets to some of the issues that really are sort of the underpinning of why so many moms and partners and dads need so much support. And there was a question around, could any of you all speak more about the issue of PTSD after newborn loss? What kind of impact mentally and emotionally did you think you experienced? Did it feel like, were you actually diagnosed with PTSD? Did it feel like PTSD? Like, how did you, what was the devastation and how would you describe it? And what were the sort of mental health challenges that you experienced after loss? And, Lauren, why don't I first turn it to you, and then Tom or Erica, please chime in.
Oh, it was, for me, right after everything happened, I remember being like, okay, I can get through this. And then, a week went by and I was just, Tom even used this adjective, I was broken. And that was the only way to really describe it. And I've always been a, happy person. I've never had any big trauma, thankfully, in my life. I've never been through a very significant grieving process. So I didn't know really how to interpret that. And so when I started, when I really started feeling bad, I was like, okay, I can, I never had therapy before. And not that I don't agree with it. I was just like, I never had needed it before. I got to a point where all my friends, there was a lot of friends that were pregnant at the same time I was, and they started having their babies. And then that was after my due date. So I was due in July, I gave birth in February. And so they started having their babies in July and August and September. And then I really hit a rock, and I was on air. I was back on air. I thought that would help. So I hadn't sought out any professional help. My husband had deployed again. Unfortunately, he deployed on my due date, which was July 10th. So he left on July 10th, which was my original due date. So it kind of all hit me, and I realized I can't do this by myself. I can't. And a lot of women were sending me their stories, which was great, but I wasn't ready to help myself, let alone help anybody else. So it was rough. And then it got to a point where I saw my best friend's baby, he had brought her to a thing that I was at, and I just bursted out in tears, and I was like, I need professional help. So, I sought out a psychiatrist. I sought out groups. And then I also started acupuncture. So anything that I could do, throw it at me. I mean, at that point I was so broken. I was like, I need to do something because I can't continue on like this. And at that point, my only goal was to get pregnant again. So there was that as well hanging over my head. And then we had started fertility treatment. So it was just a multitude of things that I was trying to, swim through. It was like a sea that I was swimming through that I couldn't see the hand in front of my face. And I was just trying to find a way out. So I got to a point in my grieving process where I was like, I can't do this by myself by going to the beach and doing yoga. That's just not going to help me mentally. I need professional help. And I finally was able to get to a point where I needed to seek that out. But, I still am dealing. I mean, Tom, I even was reading when we did this little meeting yesterday, when we were talking about it, Tom started telling the story and I started crying. And my only thing today was like, oh, don't start crying. And so Tom's
It's
telling
okay
his
if you
story.
cry.
Oh yeah, I was already crying. I was already prepared. And then Erica started telling her story and I'm holding back the tears.
Yeah,
So yes,
I have it too.
yeah.
So.
So I'm still to a point, dealing with it to some extent. Am I ever going to get over it? I don't know. I mean, it's been a year and a half, but I know I'm a lot better place than I was, in February of 2020 and pretty much all of 2020. So,
yeah.
But that was because I had to help myself.
And trying to deal with this through the pandemic, right?
Oh, yes, that was awful.
Another level of stress.
Yep. Because I was able to be isolated, and that was the thing. It was easy for me to not go back to my regular life. And it was easy for me, even though the news was still happening, I was still on air, but it was easy for me to come home and just, lock myself in my apartment. And that was it, so that added a whole other layer, but I was able to seek out help.
Tom and Eric, I want to hear from you too. Tom, just so as you're chiming in, I think what you're going to say is probably helpful to Maria from Facebook, who said, we lost our son on September 30th, and I know my husband needs help. I keep asking him to talk to someone, but he's more worried about me. How can I help him? So maybe you can help us talk about how the dads are navigating and all of that you experience.
Touch a little bit on the PTSD and the trauma thing first. I think, so Pockets of Light, we host peer support groups, and we do it a little differently than like a once a month drop in. We actually have a closed group. The same group of people meet for 7 or 8 weeks in a row, right? And the first meeting is always tell us your story, which is always, heartbreaking and terrible to hear all of these stories. But then after everyone's told their stories and we're all completely wiped out, I go into a little thing about trauma, right? And we talk about what that means. And if you actually, I used to say when we first started doing this, like you look it up in the dictionary, no one has a dictionary anymore, right? But if you define trauma in Google, it says, as the example, the loss of a child. So what you guys are going through is the definition of trauma. Now, PTSD is a diagnosed medical condition, but we all experience trauma. And I think, most people are familiar with the quote unquote stages of grief, this theory that you move through these feelings in an orderly fashion. That does not apply to this type of loss. That was people facing their own death. This is completely different. We're all over the place, right? You can be happy and sad 1 minute and the next minute at the same minute. You can be all over the place, and the amount of emotions and the height of those emotions can be so overwhelming that it's crippling. And that is normal. Like, we have helped hundreds of people over the last 5 years at Pockets of Light. It is very, very normal to feel like that. So when I see someone ask about PSD after a newborn loss, PTSD, it's like, yes, of course, that's a good question. You should go seek medical professionals and see if you're diagnosed with that, see if they can do something about it. And even if it's not PTSD particularly, know that you went through a trauma and that you're going to have a lot of emotional weight on you right now. And that's completely normal and expected. Quickly onto the question specifically about men and he won't talk. One of the things I talked a little bit about group when I told my story, we try not to put any expectations on anyone that's had a loss on how they should do it, on how you should go through grief. Everyone does it differently. Some people don't talk about it at all, but want to go for a run and think by themselves. Me, I made Haley a garden in the backyard. I didn't particularly talk a lot about my feelings about it. I didn't do that unless we were in group, or then later in life, 8 years after our loss, when we started doing Pockets of Light groups. This is not like my normal position to talk about my feelings, right? This does not come naturally to me. This is something that's happened over years. And for men specifically, it may be very hard for him to talk about how he's feeling. He may not even be able to process it in his own head, much less explain it to you or to anyone else. And that's okay. Don't feel like they have to do that. As long as they're dealing with their grief, whatever way it is, whether it's running, reading, journaling, working out, whatever. There's a million different ways to do it. It doesn't all have to be emotive or through words. And I think that's an important acknowledgement to give your partner the freedom to grieve in whatever way it is that they grieve.
They grieve, yeah. Erica, talk about how you provide support and what you see from your experience of women that you're reaching out to.
Absolutely. To add to the conversation around trauma, something else that typically does come up for those who experience loss is a form of postpartum depression. And something definitely to seek out a maternal mental health professional to really get that diagnosis to their point. So it may show up as PTSD, it may show up as postpartum depression, but there's also grief encompassed in all of that. So definitely seek out a professional to get properly diagnosed on that.
Wow, that was
and I know my light went out. And as far as support is concerned, I love the group support model that Tom was just mentioning, where you're coming together in a close community and you have that support. Unfortunately, what has happened through COVID, a lot of people aren't able to meet in person. So a lot of people have turned online and are using Zoom and using group supports through Zoom or online communities where they can come together in a safe manner where people can be vulnerable and open up and be transparent about what they've experienced and how there may be other resources that are out there outside of those group structures that they can really seek and get the guidance and help they need as they navigate and really try to transition into a new normal as they continue to navigate through grief. Grief is not linear, at all. It's something that you will continue to live with through your life, and what those groups tend to do is normalize the feelings and experiences that people are going through, but also say, hey, you may have ups and downs. The holidays may be difficult. Those anniversaries may be difficult. Attending events in life may be difficult, but it's okay. We can teach you those methods on how to move through those things, feel those things how you feel, but understand and acknowledge them as you continue on your journey.
Erica, while I'm with you, let me just ask another question and then ask others to
Sure.
chime in too. So I know there were some well-intentioned people in your life that once you experience your losses, people probably came to you, your friends or family members, and said things or did things that you might not have found particularly helpful, although I'm sure you knew that their heart was in the right place, but it didn't sort of come out right. What were some of those things? So there are others of us outside of experiencing loss who have these things happen to our family members, our best friends. I've had 2 best friends to have experienced loss. And I know for a fact how challenging it can be to communicate and support them in ways that they find supportive, right? Not just what I think is the right thing, but making sure that they receive it in a way that will be helpful. So what were some things that were maybe not helpful, or some things that maybe were helpful that other people did or said to you that you experienced after your losses?
Yes. So the not helpful thing for me was after my loss of my stillborn. He was 39 weeks, so he was full term. Obviously, I had everything set up for him. My family thought it would trigger me to come home to a full nursery, and they actually broke down the entire nursery. And that was devastating for me because I took the time and the effort to put everything together. We were preparing to bring home a baby from the hospital, but we didn't. And that was something that was just very traumatic for me. So they broke everything down, put it in a closet, and I had to look at that for, the 3 months during my maternity leave. So that's a no-no. Let people find their way of unpacking all of the memorials and memorable things that they have for their babies, especially if they purchase things in advance of the baby coming. But something else that the cliches a lot of people say are not helpful, that you can try again, or that, a lot of the, religious cliches people put on you about, God and how, there's more than one coming, or there's just so many different things that people can say that comes naturally to folks, but is not helpful in those situations. So what I always recommend for people to do is just show up, just to be there. I don't remember what was said or what was done during that time frame, but I remembered all of my family members who showed up and just came and just wrapped their arms around me and was just there to be a listening ear when I was ready to talk and I was ready to share and I was ready to call and say my son's name and my daughter's name, and they acknowledged them and said them in that manner. And I think that some people just don't recognize the benefit of quality time. And I think that that is so necessary for those who are grieving. No different than we show up for adults who pass away. We should be doing the same for babies who pass away as well, where we're showing up in that manner.
Yeah. And I think it's amazing. They all have good intentions, right? No one's intending to hurt your feelings. And actually, they just want to fix you, right? They want you to go back to how you were. So they're trying to hide the pain from you or tell you that you can get over this quickly because God doesn't give you more than you can handle. And all of those things are not, they're meant to make you feel better, like now, but nothing's going to make you feel better now, right? And I think your point about just being there is the most important part, because like I've said 3 times, and I'll say another 3 times before we're done here, right? Everyone does it differently. And so they can't possibly know what you need. They can try to think about what they may need, but that's not going to be what you as a bereaved parent needs. So all you can do is show up, be there, offer your support. And then it's up to the bereaved parents to kind of ask for it and accept it, right? Like if they're there and they're offering, you have to be able to ask and accept. But I think people feeling like they know how to fix you it's well-intentioned. It's just never works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Erica.
No, please go ahead.
Oh, I don't know. Yeah, sorry, Dr. Henderson. Yeah, for me, it was kind of, it was an interesting one, which, and bless everybody's hearts who this is the first thing you want to do is send somebody flowers. For me, I had tons of flowers. Well, I would have flowers, and every time I would look at them, I'd be reminded why people sent me flowers. And so and what else are you going to send? That means like, that's what you send people. I get it. And I appreciated everybody that did that for me, especially as we were going into a pandemic, because they couldn't see me. But those flowers for me was almost a trigger, because I'd look at them and then, and I didn't care if they died or not, because I just wasn't in that place where I just wanted to take care of these flowers that were sent for me because of the loss of my son. So for me, that was a rough thing for me. But people that would continuously send me texts, just be like, I love you, just constantly. Like, and because at that point I wasn't answering texts, but just constantly like reaching back in, and not really saying anything about anything, but just being like, hey, that was a big thing for me that I appreciated that my friends did and family.
Yeah. Dr. Henderson?
All I was going to say is just, I understand everything that you're saying, because a lot of these things apply to grief in general. And I just thinking as a provider, it is always so challenging when we're faced with these situations with patients who are losing an infant and having to give the news and having to just go through the experience of doing a delivery and knowing that the baby didn't survive. It's hard for us too. And I just wanted to acknowledge that it's traumatic as well. I can think of a baby that was lost during, actually late in my training, when I felt like I was at my best and I was invincible as an obstetrician. And literally this woman came in with bleeding, and it was the fastest C-section I had done, skin to skin, like, so from skin incision to baby, it was less than a minute. It was fast, and we couldn't save this baby. And I was pregnant at the same time, and it was traumatic. It's traumatic. And I just wanted to just leave a little small place to acknowledge the trauma of not just, moms and dads are experiencing the trauma. I know your family, they don't know how to support you. So it's good for us to take this time to talk and share resources on how you can get the support and how to be more sensitive and how you approach families that are dealing with this loss, because it is a real trauma.
Dr. Henderson, you bring up like how the trauma affects other people, right? Not just the parents. And I think it's a great point to make. There should be an article on the resources page for today's call discussing ring theory, and it's called How Not to Say the Wrong Thing. And it kind of lays out like this diagram of how the loss of a child impacts various people in your life, right? And you as the parents, you're in the middle, and then it kind of goes out in concentric circles to everyone else that baby's life has touched, which is a huge amount of people. And so I think, when we're, it shouldn't surprise anyone, right? When we're leading these groups, we spend a lot of time on how to manage relationships with other people, right? Like you figure out, how you're doing emotionally, and you can talk about that. But then it's like, how do I handle everyone else in the world? And it's just a great framework to kind of like give bereaved parents the strength to ask for help and to not accept everyone else's grief. And then it also lays it out great for grandparents and friends and coworkers and neighbors. And like, how do I approach this subject, and how can I possibly support these people? So if you're listening and you're someone that's close to a bereaved parent, but not the bereaved parent yourself, and you're wondering how to do it, please take a look at the article, read the theory a little bit. I think it helps explain it in a pretty complete way.
Mm-hmm. Well, and for, this is really for all of you all. And I know we're just about coming short of time, but Tom, in some ways you created resources that you felt were maybe missing, right? In terms of supporting families, as Erica's saying for you. And Lauren, there is a question as well around just what helped you the most. So yeah, Lauren, can you talk about what really helped you the most? And then Erica and Tom, why did you create what you created? What was missing in the support system, the supports available to parents going through this kind of loss that you felt is needed or may still be needed, even though you're doing your part to fill it? So Lauren, but why don't you start and tell us what helped you the most in this?
Well, leading up into my, I had another miscarriage in November. So I had February 2020, and then I had a 4-week miscarriage in November, and then I got pregnant through IVF. So I'm pregnant right now. Some of the things that I've done to kind of take my mind off, which I'll probably do right after this webinar, because as Dr. Henderson was saying, you know, the trauma continues to come back even though I'm pregnant now. One of the things that I did in the meantime, when I was by myself and my mind is just running and running and running and won't stop, and I'm thinking about everything. And it sounds kind of elementary, but the color, that was one thing that I did to kind of help take my mind off of something in the immediate, when I needed to like just slow everything down, and I could not slow everything down. So I'm speaking to all the women out there that are, you know, dealing with that trauma in a home and you don't have anything to turn to. I mean, coloring, because I could focus. And that was one thing that my therapist did and told me to do. And I was like, okay, that's great. But since then, one of the main things that I've done, which I did not know anything about, and I mentioned this earlier, besides some therapy that I had, acupuncture has really helped me as well. And I didn't know anything about acupuncture, nothing. And then my husband said, we use this in the Marine Corps sometimes for pain, and you do a multitude of things. I started doing some research, and I'm still seeing an acupuncturist. And I think that did help me with the grieving process, and now has helped me with my trauma and helped me going forward in this new pregnancy. So that's something that, you know, I think besides the therapy and besides the groups, something that people can also look into if they're so inclined, because I do believe that helps. But, you know, also coloring, just something that you can do at home for the now.
That's great. That's great. And
Yeah.
we just have a couple more minutes. So Erica and then Tom, what more
Yes.
should we be doing to provide support to families?
Absolutely. I think that the power of storytelling is the reason why I continue to podcast and share stories weekly. You know, the podcast episode we released this week was about a woman who experienced a twin loss during COVID, and, you know, not being able to have her partner in the room, and just the trauma that she experienced. And it normalizes this conversation that we're having today. And I think that that's needed for people to hear other people's stories, so that we can continue to have these conversations and talk about the solutions and things that we can do to get the support around us within our communities, but also, you know, definitely within our providers, within legislation, you know, making sure that we get all of the things that we need. So continuing to share stories is something that is still powerful for me, and something I will continue to do through the Sisters in Laws platform.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I think the more we do that, right, the more comfortable newly bereaved parents are going to feel about going out and seeking help. The more normal, it's a normal part of life because it happens. We just don't talk about it like it's a normal part of life. And I think the more we do, the more stories that are told, the better. I think Pockets of Light, the reason it was founded, after we lost Haley, we were fortunate to bring home 2 healthy children. Then we did have a subsequent miscarriage. My wife, Erin, got together with 2 other bereaved parents, one who had gone through recurrent miscarriages, and then one who had lost a child that she had brought home. And the 3 of them, very different losses. None of them could find the group support that they were looking for. And so together they decided to get together and create Pockets of Light. And the whole theory behind it is that it's differentiated, right? So if you have miscarriage loss, you can talk to other people with miscarriage. You have stillbirth, early infant, you can talk to people with early infant and stillbirth loss. And then if you have a later loss, you can talk to people with like that. And because those sources of trauma are all different and bring up all different types of grieving, we thought it was important to do that. But then by keeping the group together, right, we moved beyond just the storytelling and getting your story out and moving through the actual grief process and how you process the loss and how you're going through that, how you get back into normal life, how you return to work, how you talk to friends, how you do all that other stuff, which I think, you know, I think going back, you know, a decade, there's been the monthly meeting at hospitals where if you've lost a child, you can come into the hospital and meet new people every month, might not even be the same facilitators. You don't move past that. This is what happened to me on this day. And so I think it's more important to get into the depth of like, how do you actually deal with real life once it happens?
Yeah, no, that's great. Very helpful. And we're just out of time. I feel like we could go so much longer, but we need to end it now. Maybe we'll have part 2 another time. Thank you all for joining and being willing to be here and tell your story. Just very quickly before we go, there are a ton of resources on this slide. I think probably on the Facebook, you'll be able to see this as well if you want to come back. If you want to share this recording with others, if there were some technology problems or whatever, please share this on Facebook, get it out to people. I mean, this is the one good thing about social media is we can share these things really easily and get it out to people that weren't able to be here today. I also want to just let you know, as I mentioned, I was testifying on the Hill yesterday in support of so many different issues around stillbirth, but there's a lot of legislation in Congress right now. One issue is the Support Through Loss Act is a bill that would require U.S. employers to provide at least 3 days of paid leave for workers. Can you imagine going through an experience like what you've heard today and having to go immediately to work the next day? Like, it just is not even possible. But that is literally what happens to so many women and partners who go through a loss, have no time to physically, emotionally, mentally heal. We need to do better by these families. And so we want to ask you to join us in this effort to get the Support Through Loss Act passed. There's a link that is available down at the bottom. Go to marchdimes.org, get more information there. And again, we have our efforts on advocacy generally at blanketchange.org. Again, that's also on our website. Sign up to become an advocate for Blanket Change, which addresses all these issues around maternal and infant health. And lastly, our wall of remembrance. This is a great way to tell your story, to make sure that you can honor your baby that it may not be here today, but lives on in your heart and lives on in all of our hearts. And we want to ask you to post your tribute there. So I want to say thank you again to Tom, to Lauren, to Erica, to Dr. Henderson. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing all your experience and your expertise. We are so grateful to what you're doing and so grateful for all the support you're providing so many families who need it. So thank you all for being with us, and hope you enjoyed today. Please feel free to share this on Facebook. We'll continue to have people that can answer questions on the chat too. So great to be with you all today, and thanks for joining.